Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Good afternoon. Good morning. How are you?
Good
Good.
morning.
Must be early in the States, Katia.
It's 8. It's
Oh,
not too bad.
not too bad.
No. The worst I had was we've been having meetings with all the plant groups, and we had one at midnight, from midnight to 2 a.m., and then another one at 6 a.m. That was painful. No, this is normal. This is fine. Yeah.
Let me just message Herbert and see if he's activated to join. One sec.
Okay.
Katja, I don't have this beautiful background like
Oh,
you.
you need to ask Kelly. Kelly was the one making us our background. I usually have a cork oak just because I love cork, but today I decided to go with milkweed, which is huge important plant here in the US. And I'm guessing Kelly probably still waking up. I guess that's why she's hiding behind our logo.
I'm just being a silent observer and also monitoring the YouTube link, the chat, and the participants list to make sure people are able to get in.
So I can see.
Yeah, I'll admit them as much as I see them if you want.
So
unless you want to screen them, Katja.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Okay, I'll let you do it then if you'd like.
Shall I quickly test sharing my screen? Well, there's not many of us. I think I might need to be co-hosted.
Let me make you a co-host. Hang on.
You should be able. Wait, if we put all participants. Yeah. You can start all participants. Okay, I just changed the settings, so you should be able to share now, I think. Double check.
Does that look?
Yeah.
Like a presentation. Great.
I can see it.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. Just to say regarding so I just sent the other person out. First of all, because it hasn't started yet. So just let us discuss some things without having people watching. But I made a mistake.
It is live on YouTube though, Katja.
Oh, is it already? Oh, wow.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Be aware. I can't pause it after I start it, and I had to get the link. So just FYI.
Okay, that's fine. Well, then if people are watching, we made a mistake that, Eduardo should come in. And although I had to manually accept the registrations to prioritize plant people, at the end there was a mistake and it looks like the link was sent to everyone. So I just sent to those people that weren't accepted, let's say, asking them to join on YouTube as well. But I think we might have to do some filtering. I don't know if that will be just, too much work, but we'll see. Bear with us, people. I'm still learning.
And it's good because there's the YouTube element. So it's not like, everyone can join in some capacity, which is good.
Yeah, everyone should be able to. Yeah, and we'll be recording this and sharing after as well.
Exactly.
The YouTube link is in the chat if anyone wants to share it with colleagues.
Oh, thank you, Kelly.
Hello, good morning, Katja. Good morning, Vet. Marcio.
Hi, Eduardo. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Good to see you, Katja.
Thank you. Good to see you. Although I'm still not looking at you because I'm just trying to do other things, but just give me a moment. Oh, okay. Okay, I'll just monitor the people entering then, Kelly. And I'll ask you to check YouTube if there are any comments or...
Yep.
Any questions?
I'm watching the chat on YouTube and I'm watching the chat in the meeting.
Thank you.
Of course.
Marcio, do you want to test your presentation or something?
Yeah. I'm fixing the camera here.
Oh.
Let me see. And here. Put here. Aqui. Essa.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. Let me see. I didn't. It's the first. Katia,
Yeah.
what slide are you seeing?
I
The first one?
see. I guess so. It's the one that says more than 37,000 native plant species, and then it has it
I've seen
by
this.
group, the numbers by group.
Okay. Now is the first one?
Yes. Now I think it's the first one. It has the title and your name. Yeah.
I stop here. I need to change my desktop today because Zoom don't work in my computer.
Oh no. It's always something with either Zoom or Teams, right? I must say I'm more used to Teams, but I know Teams fails a lot as well.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Christina. How are you?
Fine, and you?
Good, thank you.
Oh, that's such a pretty picture you have behind you.
Thank you. It was Kelly. So
Oh, good.
all
Thank you,
credits go to
Kelly.
Kelly. It's
Hello,
some
everyone.
milkweed seeds. I thought it was appropriate for today.
Definitely.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm gonna try sharing my screen just for a couple of minutes
Yeah.
to make sure. Let me see. You can see it there, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. I'm gonna stop if I can go back. Okay, there we go.
I'm just going to wait a couple more minutes for a few more people to join us.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay, we're far from the 100 people who registered from the planned groups, but I guess people would just join us a few minutes late. I think we should start anyway. I just want to thank, of course, the speakers who have agreed to share their experiences, and especially Christine and Yvette for really leading this webinar and pushing us forward. And thanks everyone for registering and joining us here today. For those on Zoom and YouTube, please share your questions on the chat in both YouTube and Zoom. We'll be monitoring both of them. And yeah, I just want to say, we decided to make this a meeting because we wanted to be a more dynamic discussion at the end. So I hope when we move from the talks to the discussion, people don't disappear. That's what usually happens, right? So I hope that doesn't happen today, because we really, really want to hear from you. This is not just you learning from our speakers, but us learning from your experience as well, which I'm sure all of you have something to share. So we'll start with presentations, and then we'll have a Q&A after that. And then we'll have breakout rooms to hear your thoughts on the singularities of doing conservation planning for plants, and opportunities and challenges as well. So with that, I'll pass to Yvette, our first speaker. And I guess, Yvette, it's better that you introduce yourself than I do. So yeah, I'll share the floor to you. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Kathy. And let me just share my screen. Does that all look okay?
Yes, perfect.
Great. So yeah, I'm Yvette Harvey-Brown, and I work at the Botanic Gardens Conservation International, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk about how we at BGCI are working with our partners to use conservation assessments produced through the Global Tree Assessment to scale up action for trees. So just, I'm sure many of you will already have heard of it, but just in case you haven't, the Global Tree Assessment is a new approach to assessing the conservation status of tree species. It's co-led by BGCI and the IUCN SFP Global Tree Specialist Group. And our target is to have a conservation assessment in place for all of the world's tree species. So yeah, quite a big task for this initiative. So how did we start off the process? So the first step is that we had to develop the world's first list of tree species and also their country level distributions. If we didn't know how many species there were and what they were, we weren't going to be able to assess them. So this actually was a really big job just in itself, and we compiled data from various different databases, scientific references, and consulted with a lot of tree experts. And this information is now all accessible in the database Global Tree Search, and it tells us that there's almost 60,000 tree species. So with nearly 60,000 tree species, this makes the Global Tree Assessment the largest biodiversity assessment ever undertaken at the species level. So yeah, we've really had our work cut out over the last couple of years. But last year we managed to produce our landmark publication, The State of the World's Trees, which is a summary of extinction risk information for the world's trees, and it gave information on tree diversity, threats, uses, and conservation action. And the headline statistic is that we now know that 30% of tree species are now threatened with extinction, and at least 142 tree species are recorded as extinct in the world. And this means that there are more threatened tree species than there are total species of mammals and birds, which again really highlights why having these kind of specific conversations focused on plants is really important, because our task is a really big one. What we really wanted to do was make sure that all of this information that was used to compile the State of the World Trees was available in a more accessible format. So we've developed the Global Tree Portal, where you can explore global tree species distributions, their conservation status, and also conservation actions. And this is available at 3 different levels: the species level, the country level, and the global level. So for example, at the country level, you can type in a country and it will tell you how many species are native to it, which ones are endemic, and how many are threatened. And you can download a CSV file that will have those species and flag up the endemics and also their IUCN Red List status. And then additionally, at the species level, we also have a conservation action tracker, which records current conservation action and who's doing what. So it's a really important tool to try and identify gaps in conservation effort, and also to encourage collaboration between partners. And it kind of adds an additional layer of information to the Red List, because it's much more focused on recovery. So do we know if there's a propagation protocol? Is it found in ex situ collections? All that kind of thing. So much more focused on kind of future recovery planning. So we're hoping that that will be a really useful tool for planning into the future. So the Global Tree Assessment will be completed by the end of next year. However, conservation assessments are only the first step towards the conservation of a threatened species. So once we've identified a species as being at risk of extinction, we need to plan actions. So we need to identify what those are and who needs to implement them. So we're really excited that as we've been completing assessments, often now we've kind of got national countries now have completed a lot of their assessments, and we're excited to kind of move from that next phase of how do we use these conservation assessments to inform, plan, and then have subsequent actions. And also highlighted by the kind of scale of the problem with the State of the World's Trees report, if we were to go species by species, developing kind of single species recovery plans, that would take a really long time, and probably by the time we'd have done that for, you know, even a small subset of species, a lot of them will have become extinct. So we're really interested in trying to get that balance where we're making sure that actions are tailored as much as possible to specific species, but also being able to avoid duplication of effort and maximize impact by kind of finding approaches that coordinate a multi-species approach. And this is what we've been kind of looking at exploring conservation planning at a national level. So we first looked into doing this in Kenya, which is a country that has a great variety of ecology and has two important global biodiversity hotspots, including the Eastern Afro-Montane Biodiversity Hotspot and the Coastal Forest of Eastern Africa. We have a real high diversity of tree species. There are more than 1,000 native trees to Kenya. And we're also really lucky that in Eastern Africa, we have a very active Red List Authority, and they're a huge reserve of botanical knowledge, and they've been producing assessments for a really long time now. So we were able to utilize that information and that resource to run a joint Red List workshop with them in 2018 to assess the remaining endemic trees to Kenya. And in addition to having really good botanical knowledge in Kenya, we also have very good conservation partners on the ground, including Botanic Gardens. And there's also a huge national interest in tree planting, and they have a very large Bond Challenge pledge. So the IUCN Species Survival Commission strategic plan promotes 3 activities to ensure that threatened species are conserved and managed sustainably. The Assess, Plan, Act. So the first being assess, where assessments are carried out by Red List authorities and specialist groups. So for example, in Kenya, this was with the Eastern African Plant Red List Authority and the Global Tree Specialist Group. And then moving through into plan, the Conservation Planning Specialist Group providing support to move through that cycle. So we reached out to the Conservation Planning Specialist Group really early on in the process, and they were an invaluable source of support. And when we did our conservation planning workshops, they very much led the facilitation of that process and helped us develop the workshops in a way using their kind of guidelines, which they use, but also very much tailored to tailoring it to plants and that kind of multi-species method. So they were a real invaluable resource, and we definitely wouldn't have been able to do this without them. So, but yeah, they were really kind of key players in this process. And then lastly, for the ACT element, these were our participants of our conservation planning workshops, and they were a range of different stakeholders, including research institutes, botanic gardens, NGOs, government, and also community-based organisations as well. So for our workshops, me and myself and my colleague Kirsty Shaw worked with our 2 conservation planning specialist group facilitators, which was Caroline Lees and Claudine Gibson, who are based in New Zealand. So there was a lot of very late nights for them. And this was, back in 2020. So it was a really new experience. I think also for Conservation Planning Specialist Group, they hadn't done much plant work before. So they were also very interested, based on their experiences, mainly with working with non-plants, to try and, also kickstart their work in plants as well. So it was a very kind of exciting project for both of us. We used for the workshop their kind of planning process of looking at where are we now, where do we want to get to, what are the obstacles, what do we need to do about them, and how are we going to do it. And the key things we wanted to get out of the workshop was kind of understanding the threats to trees in Kenya, what actions can be implemented to address them, and what are the indicators of success, who are the key stakeholders, and then really getting into the nitty-gritty of what are the next steps. So we've made sure we've got that immediate timeline of, okay, when this workshop ends, what are we going to do about it? So in preparation for the workshop, we developed a timeline. So there were 5 workshops over a 2-month period. We had a national opening workshop where we had stakeholders from all over the country. And then we had 3 workshops that were very much focused on 2 priority regions, and then a final one that was national as well, where we kind of reported back and agreed the kind of next steps at a national level. Unfortunately, it was the end of 2020, so it was very much middle of COVID. So all of this was done online, which had challenges, but also opportunities. The kind of good thing when you can be in person is everyone's kind of in the room in 4 days, and there's a bit of a mission, and you can, get a lot done. But virtually did have some opportunities, because we were able to spread the meetings over that kind of longer period. And in between each of those meetings, we were able to do quite a lot of synthesizing about what we had done, and I've got a lot of like future prep, and be able to bring individuals from the working groups to do bits and pieces of work. So actually before each of the next sessions, we got quite a lot of dirt done, and we're able to make quite a lot of progress. So it definitely did help to have that bit of time in between the sessions. And also because it was virtual, you can't really expect people to sit there for all day. So we kind of capped each session at 3 hours, which I think was a really good level. So for the kind of planning to plan, we did do a lot of planning to plan. For each session, we did have made sure we had aims and outputs, so we knew exactly what we wanted to do. And again, to try and add variety, it's very difficult to be sat doing the same thing for 3 hours. So we made sure that we developed some specific online tools that would help us through this process. So we very much, again, working with CPSG, developed these kind of very useful online tools to make sure that we could kind of get the most out of everyone during the workshops. So before each session, we developed a prompt sheet that was given to each of the facilitators. Often the sessions will have quite complicated parts to them. We'll split up into breakout groups. Someone will be sharing their screen. Someone needs to be keeping time. Some people will be presenting on different things. So it was really important to have that kind of rundown of exactly who was responsible for what and what the timings were for each of those. Particularly being online, it's really important to have had that all worked out. And at the end, Caroline always put have an aspirin and lie down, because doing a workshop online like this is really intense. And I think as a facilitator, you always want to make sure that you kind of uphold your end of the bargain, because everyone's giving up their time to be there. You want to make sure you're getting the most out of their knowledge and making sure that you're kind of fulfilling the aims of the workshop. So, you really do want to kind of make sure you've done that prep beforehand, so that, you can really kind of juice all that knowledge out of everyone in those hours that you have. So another thing that I was kind of really leading on is also developing some assess to plan matrices. So this is where red list assessment information is exported. And if you look on the left-hand side, that's basically parts of the red. It's impossible to see, but there's basically different parts of the red list. So you have things like the distribution, habitat, threats, and then on the bottom it's the different species. And it basically enables you kind of to take a step back from the red list, where you can see it all in one place, and able to try and find groupings between species. So which species have similar threats, which species have similar habitats, and it's that kind of helpful for when you're trying to like make groupings to say that this suite of species need similar kind of actions. And this was really helpful. So what we ended up doing was 2 specific priority areas were selected for these workshops. So we focused on species in the coastal forest, and also species in the tighter hills, which is part of the Afro-Montane hotspot. And we produced 2 matrices for each one of those areas. And they were really important, so that we had a list for all the species that were found in those areas, the key threats in each of those areas. So that was a really useful resource, because later on in the workshop, we had a threat analysis session, and all of those threats were based on the red list data. So again, using the red list data directly to feed into the planning process. And also all the mapping data was also all the maps from the red list as well. So again, really helping to show how that the system is all linked together, and is, not duplicating effort by trying to, redo everything. You're trying to use what information you have available. We also did a stakeholder analysis to make sure we had representation from key groups, and develop briefing materials to make sure that everybody knew how we got to where we got to, and had the same information available about where we wanted to go. So we had a series of workshops where we had over 30 different organisations represented. In the first workshop, we did a visioning session. So this was getting our partners to look into the future for 10 years, and then say if the conservation plan had been successfully implemented, looking back, and what were those key things which meant that it was a success, and to describe those changes. So we got them to do that on a Padlet board. which we then summarised, and we had over 60 contributions, and then distilled into a visioning statement which captured all of these different elements. We then also developed 5 goals, national level goals, and a website with had all our collaborators' information of the process. And then we went down into our regional groups where we did a threat analysis. So that's what I was saying here in the boxes in red are the red list threats, and the numbers are the number of species. So the bigger boxes were ones which were affecting more species. And then we dug down into their causes, impacts, and obstacles. And then in the next 2 workshops, we very much got into solutions. So what are the key threats and how do we then mitigate them? And then also looking into prioritizing those. So for example, for the Taita Hills, looking into the threats and then also going into the conservation strategies to be able to effectively try and combat those threats. So then lastly, in the last workshop, we very much focused on the next steps of which of those regional actions should be elevated to the national level. We also did quite a nice thing where we got everyone to go to a Padlet board and then under each one of the goals, pledge what they were going to do. So we had kind of concrete actions with the organisation underneath saying, we will do X, Y, and Z to contribute to this goal. So that was really nice. And then lastly, after the workshop, we drafted a report, which everyone was able to input and edit. And this has been a really vital tool for helping us to develop stronger funding applications. And a number of these have been really successful. And I think that's just because it highlights how doing really good planning, getting all the partners involved at that process means that when you're going to do funding applications, they're going to be well thought out. They're going to, they're going to be attractive. And then the partnerships that result from those funding applications are going to be a lot stronger than they would be otherwise. So yeah, that's Mimi, and I'm going to pass it to her. That I'm not sure if he's speaking next or later, but he will go into more detail about what we've been doing since the planning work. So yeah, quite a nice full circle to show the whole process. I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Yvette. We had initially planned to Marcio to go next. I don't know if it makes sense to Herbert to follow up from your presentation, maybe, since it was the same project. I don't know if Herbert is ready to present now.
Anyway, I can now, I can after anyone followed how she's done it. Thank you very much.
Thank
so
you,
do
Herbert.
I go or I wait after?
Yeah, you can go now. Do you mind, Marcio?
I go on.
Yeah, go on, Herbert.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Yvette, for sharing my screen. And okay, let me do this a little bit faster. Sorry, so I will go from hello, is it visible?
Not yet.
Okay. Is it visible now?
I can't see it yet, but I can see you sharing. Yeah, I can see it now. Thank you.
Okay. So Yvette has done a nice introduction of how we formulated from the idea to the whole process, looking for partnership. So me, I'll jump to where the rubber meets the road and show you some little progress as at now and how far we've gone. So welcome all. And now this is where the action started, and after the workshops and the sites were identified, then down to species level, and then scaling up to improvement of existing initiatives and starting new ones. Using the maps and the various tools, we were able to do the various surveys in various counties. First, it was to check whether all that we have and had been mapped as previous historic data is still there. And then that was the right thing to use, especially in training, and also to correct or also to add on to the data that's existing, because surveys are done and perhaps not everything is captured, or what was captured previously might be missing. So we did the mapping of the target species. We collected voucher specimens in various locations, and did lots of phenological surveys. And during all this time, we also were doing all these activities with the community and also the stakeholders, so that they can learn from the field even as we go on to the seed collection, community training, and then designation of sites for future planting. So we were able to get some of the species, and we are also unable to get some. So it's still work in progress. We're not sure if some of them have been are extinct by now, because some are not in their previous locations as recorded historically. For example, these are critical species, critically endangered species in the Shimba Hills, and it's Vangoriopsis shimbaensis. It's one of the trees that has the least population in the moist forest. These
Sorry,
are some
Herbert.
of the, yeah.
I don't know if you're moving your slides. We're still looking at the first slide. I don't know if you're moving forward and we're not just seeing it.
It seems like okay. I'm moving, but I'm not seeing it.
No, and we're still looking at yeah, the actual PowerPoint, not the presentation mode.
Is it moving now?
Yes, if you're clicking, yeah, now we can see it, but it's not on presentation mode. It's just on the PowerPoint.
Okay. How do I achieve that?
No. Yeah, Punk Chab is saying for you to use the presentation mode on the lower right-hand corner. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're seeing with the notes, but that's fine. I think this is fine. Yeah, perfect.
That's fine, huh? So these
Yeah.
are the examples that I had been talking about, and that shows the various parts of the plant and what we were checking to see. So we would check on the flowers, show the flowers. To some of us, it was the first time we are seeing it, other than the descriptions given in the taxonomy books. And then also it involved lots of analysis of the populations, the sizes of the trees, if there is any regeneration, if the trees are seeding, and that was very important. So these are some of the information also we collect to take back to the East African Herbarium. So this is a herbarium vulture of Isolana cauliflora. So that's very, very important also to update the records that are there. And this is exactly what happens during the phenological surveys and voucher specimen collections. So we were also keen to take nice quality pictures that we'd use, especially as we go on, as we do any publication, and also to inform others about the species so that they can go and see it, even if it's a different officer working at a later time. And it was followed by some training in various communities. These pictures from Shimba Hills. And we also did some training in every other county that we did it. So we did it with the Kaya communities and also with the counties around the Mount Kenya. And this shows that even the training was participatory. So she has touched on this slide, and I will jump and show some of what we got. So for the partnerships, we did it. We did a partnership with the International Tree Foundation, and we were able to do the surveys and the trainings in 4 counties around Mount Kenya. And we can see the demographics and the data of the people who participated in the trainings. And the trainings were definitely to build capacity in the community and forest associations on IDing of the trees, seed collection, pre-treatment, propagation, and planting of the threatened tree species. This is knowledge that will equip them to continue with the activity at the field level. And some of the partners like the ITF who deal with much more than our scope, especially things to do with the gender mainstreaming in conservation, river rehabilitation, agroforestry, school projects in these counties also will help, such that if we would achieve these targets, we'll end up incorporating the threatened tree species in the local community planting. So they definitely have a formal way of doing it, and they are attached to some of the national partners like Kenya Forestry, KFS Service, and also KEFRI and others. So the capacity building went on in various places. You can see most of it was happening, not necessarily at a far location, but at their working location in their nurseries, so that what we will touch, we will do some improvements on site. We would also display all the materials that we get, and even try carry others from different locations so that we can show them how to deal generally even with the issue of tree planting, and also dealing with various kinds of seeds, which are also not necessarily threatened, but they are part of their activities. So this was at Samburu. As you can see, the Maasai women displaying their cultures, they're working, and also the right side was in Meru. So we would also try to teach them their species from their local dialect so that they can understand them. It wouldn't be so important for them to know them in Latin if they don't know them in their local dialect, because that also will help us in using their local knowledge to trace where these trees are, and also to know if there is any activity going around them, and maybe perhaps understanding how they can achieve all that. So an example of thus far, that was the first, that was last year. This year we have had our surveys and follow-up surveys, and we are noticing a lot. Definitely at the moment, Kenya seems to be very, very dry, and I think it's happening in the whole world, that there's lots of climate change and the effects are far-fetched here. But subsequent surveys in Kiambu, we've found out that there is new population, additional individuals in the existing documented populations. For example, if you look at bullet point B, that is Euphorbia cosanoides, at first we only knew one individual in a population, but we got another new population with 12 individuals down the river, which is more than 20 kilometers on follow-up surveys. that has enabled us to understand the distribution, and we are yet also to do more surveys. So this is a result of what we did from the first survey, where we first went and used the historic data, and we got one tree. We didn't know there are two more others hidden in the bush, like mature seedling trees, and we got a couple of seeds. The seeds were germinated in various locations, one at Mandhari Nursery, one in Thika at our partner's nursery, and also one in National Museum. And all of them have got nice, good results. We are having more than 200 seedlings coming up. This is a plus for our critically endangered species, and we are yet to wait for them to mature and reach the size of the field planting. So other than that, some of them have been planted, like the green big leaf, that is Brucia macrocarpa. And also during our surveys, some of the species which we never targeted, we found them, like you can see there's pavetta, the black fruits, and also Bafia, which is endemic to Kenya. So these are some of the data we've been collecting in terms of how much seedlings we are coming up with. Some of them are far from the target numbers, but we're still working on to see if we can get to good numbers. So these are other sites, and also other sites surprised us having new recorded populations of some threatened species in Kenya, which were not previously recorded, like here, the Brucia macrocarpa, the Vitex kenyensis in Embu, were not previously recorded in the same places. So that happens in most of the locations. So this is data from Meru, for example, like the forest has generally dried, and we are seeing a lot of degradation of some species like Premna and Euvaryodendron anisatum being taken down by elephants. I think they're hungry because of the lack of green vegetation currently. And also we are still following up and seeing some of the nurseries still have needs, like some of them have lost their water sources, and thus we end up losing seedlings. So those are some of the challenges we get in some of the places. So here is a very hard to reach county, partly because it's semi-arid or almost arid in some parts. And then there is a lot of insecurity in the northern Kenya. So this is a county that had 4 target species, and among them we've only managed to reach 3 sites with a success of two species. So the species are here, and some of the challenges also showing, and you can use this to predict future populations. Like for the Ocotea, we found that all the individuals were old and no signs of regeneration, same to Premna maxima. But on the Premna maxima, much as there's none germinating on the floor of the forest, or maybe juveniles, there's a lot of seed lying on the ground. So on such, we were able to organize that in the future, the Forest Service will still go in the forest with the communities, so that they can do it in the nurseries and maybe preserve some plots to do regeneration and reforestation with the same species, since most individuals are old. So this has a base of like 6 meters diameter, and that's the endemic camphor in Kenya, Ocotea kenyensis. And that's a picture of a seed of Premna maxima, maybe 10 times zoomed in. So this is our team as they're trying to identify and also show the community while inside the forest. This is a week ago in Marsabit. So other than that, we also had the Kaya forests, which consists of the coastal forests and the national museums, and the sites protected by the national museums as cultural sites where they use to do their rituals, and also to they are also used for any other, like a source of food and every other thing. So we were able to get some seeds in boxes of Obtusifolia. No one has ever had that in their nurseries. Ongoing collection and sowing is happening. Also very lucky to get Coffea, Pseudozambrebarii, and Ovialis keniensis, all of them having seedlings at their nurseries. So these are the pictures at Kaya, at the various Kayas. This is Kaya Choni, and that's Kaya Mzee, like the elders, on the top left, with the seedlings of Coffea, Pseudozambrebarii, and then down we have the communities and the families being shown how to do the seeds, and luckily 90% of the seeds of Ovialis keniensis did germinate. This is also some small nurseries at their homes, since seems to be very far to transport water to their major nursery inside the Kaya at Kaya Mtsokara. And on the picture, that's a picture of boxes that we were able to get seeding. So these are some of the nurseries, and they're really doing a good work amid all the struggles that we are having. So that's a scope of what we are having, and it's still continuing on. And we're trying to look forward, and we're looking forward for the rains, because we know without the rains we can hardly go far, since nature won't reproduce and have seeds without it. So thank you, and I'll pass it back.
Thank you, Herbert. It's really good to hear quite good examples as yours when things really, really work, right? Okay, so just to say, everyone, if you're watching us on YouTube, please feel free to join us on Zoom. Kelly just shared the link on the YouTube chat. We had 100 people registered from the plant groups, but clearly, yeah, only a quarter joined us. So if you're watching on YouTube, please feel free to join us on Zoom, because we'd like to have a discussion at the end, and it will be great to have participation from different expertise. And I'll pass to Marcio to share the experience that Rio de Janeiro Botanic Garden and Sensei Flora have the work they've been doing on conservation planning in Brazil.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Katja, and all organizers for the invitation. And wherever you are joining us, it is indeed a great pleasure to be present to you today on a few steps on how we developed plant conservation planning in Brazil. And I will try to talk about challenges, opportunities, and one success story. Okay, so following the species conservation cycle, we use standard tools to assess species conservation status, to plan collaborative conservation strategies and policies, and then act to reverse the risk of plant extinction. And here in Brazil, our first biggest challenges was to catalog flora species. And today we know that we have more than 37,000 species of native plants, and 19,000 of which are endemic species. And to date, more than 7,524 species have been assessed, and of those, 3,213 species are threatened with extinction. These assessment numbers represent 21% of all no-flora species. Moreover, 43% of them are threatened with extinction. With this number in mind, how to plan conservation strategies for plants? This is the path we have taken to prepare the National Action Plan. And the first step is to define the scope and approach for the plan, followed by data analysis, fieldwork, definition of priority areas for actions, the conservation planning workshop, and finally the consolidation and publication stage. In this step, the conservation target and the plan approach are defined. That is, it will be focused on a single or a multi-species plan, for example. And here in Brazil, due to the large number of threatened plant species, we have preferentially adopted a territorial approach because it's cover a great number of species, optimize efforts and research. Also, mobilize local stakeholders and strategic coordinator actions to address threat in this area. In the data analysis step, we use the species information from the species risk assessment and search from detailed data about the territory. The fieldwork step covered 3 goals: collect biological data, for example, record the target species in the wild, and mapping and on-site verification of threats that have been identified in geospatial database. And finally, identify local stakeholders and existing conservation initiatives. Here, tools are used to allow prioritization areas based on opportunities for conservation, avoid conflicts with the economic activities and arbitrary decisions on necessary actions. It also directs to the areas where conservation actions will be most successful and cost effective. With all this information and data prepared, we held the workshop with different stakeholders to define the objectives and agree on actions, including associated products, responsibilities, deadlines, and cost. The last step is to prepare the publications, which can be a book or executive summary for this dissemination of the plan. And all products for creating the administrative process are consolidated in this step. Then the plan is approved as a conservation instrument through an administrative ruling published in the official Gazette of Brazil, and the technical advisor group is created to monitor this plan. This graph shows us an overview of the number of threatened species with National Action Plan over the years in Brazil. As you can see, this territorial approach of the plan allow us to scaling up the number of species, including in National Action Plan. Our focus here is to ensure that we don't just include threatened species in National Action Plan, but also mobilize so that strategic actions are effectively implemented. These are the National Action Plan for plants that we coordinated, and here and Favero, Juízo National Action Plan was concluded. 3 other action plans are in progress, and 3 are we are working on right now. Also, as part of National Strategy for Threat Species Conservation, Brazil has been developing more than 10 territorial action plan that include animals and plants together. And these plans are coordinated by the state environmental agencies. Let's go to the action. And in the implementation phase, the national action plans are monitored each year by the technical advisor group. In the last year, the plan is evaluated and can be closed or replanned or incorporated into another plan. This is the governance of the plan. The coordination is carried out by Rio de Janeiro Botanical Garden here, and monitoring by the members of the advisor group, and implementation by all stakeholders. From now, I will show you a case of Faveiro de Wilson National Action Plan. And well, the panel with the status of implementation of the 33 actions of the National Action Plan after the final monitoring showed that 45% of them had been done, and 27% had been started and not completed in time. And another 27% had not started or didn't. Among the results of the plan, I highlight here for you just a few that I choose, such the production of a wanted poster and leaflets. These tree hunting mobilized local communities and many people, as the materials were fixed everywhere. And then people could call researchers when they found a tree. This made it possible for researchers to find new trees and populations of species. Farmers who protect the tree on their farm were awarded species protection certificates. And one illustrated educational booklet preserving the rare faveiros intended for school, farms, faveiro hunters, stakeholders, and other partners was published. And 4 educational activities performed at schools. 4 events involved presentations, exchange of ideas, and tributes to volunteers. And a great deal of research was carried out on Faveiro de Wilson in the following areas. For example, population ecology, prospecting, inventories, population genetics, reproductive biology, exit dispersion, physiology, and seed conservation, and propagation and nurses, for example. And genetic studies, for example, have shown that Faveiro de Wilson is probably a natural hybrid of another species. More than 1,500 people from different sectors of society act as collaborators or beneficiaries of the plan. Teachers, students, farmers, volunteers, and 20 institutions representing the society, NGOs, the private sector, and government participated in the implementation of the actions. The tree hunt result in 44% increase in the number of trees recorded and monitored. And this represents an 8% increase in the extent of occurrence of species. And 414 seedlings were planted and monitored. With this knowledge product with the plan, it was possible to reassess the species in a lower risk category. This is still not a genuine category change, but it was greatly celebrated by all involved in the plan. The species also had the evaluation of the green status carried out, which will allow us to track progress toward full ecological recovery, what is still challenging. Research raised with public notice from 4 sources. Through the final research obtained were quite limited, it was still possible to achieve a lot of. And certainly obtain financial research is the biggest challenge. And to finish, I try to summarize some challenges and opportunities or things that have worked in conservation planning in Brazil. And for the topic and challenges, for example, financial research for plants conservation planning, growing number of flora species, a large number of plant species to assess, increased number of threat plant species, large territory of the country, and action plan management, it's small teams, stakeholders and collaborators engagement, and plant blindness. And for the topic about the opportunities and success, ongoing communication, messaging apps, for example, or newsletter, and regular meeting with the plan advisor group, seminars for collaborators to share experience, and territorial approach to the National Action Plan, state coordinated conservation planning, and project developed jointly by the networks, and appreciate the contribution of local people. And many thanks, and please feel free to reach me if you have any future question.
Thank you, Marcio. This is great. Quite a few good examples. I love the finding program. I think it's great. Okay, and I'll pass to Cristina from Colombia. She's actually going to have 2 hats, one from the national plans in Colombia, but also with CICADS. On to you, Cristina.
Katia, do you want to have Eduardo first, since he's also from Brazil, and then me last, or?
Eduardo isn't actually presenting. He was, supporting Marcio. I don't know, Eduardo, do you want to share something from the Brazil side? No, I think Eduardo was just supporting Marcio. Oh, right. There he is.
Okay, so wait, can you see my presentation, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for being here and for your interest in plant conservation and conservation planning in general. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to share some lessons learned from CICAD conservation at the global level and also at the national level. As you saw with the examples in Kenya and Brazil, doing the plan is actually, quite challenging, and then implementing the plan is also quite challenging. And we have been doing that for CICADs for many years. So we want to share some of our experiences, and hopefully, this will be useful if you are to start some conservation plans or you're already implementing conservation plans. And I'm going to talk from the point of view of CICADs. At the global level, we have a CICAD specialist group. And well, it's very old, it's more than 30 years old. And we have done global red list of all CICADs 3 times already. We have about almost 400 species of CICADs in the world right now. So it's a relatively small group compared to trees or others, but it's a lot of species that we do at the global level. And then we have had a conservation action plan at the global level since 2003. And now we kind of redesigned our conservation plan in kind of a bigger, with more ambitious goals. And we actually call it the CICAD Strategy 2020-2050. So we're moving into more concrete actions and larger scales in several topics beyond the things we were doing before. And as Katia was saying, I'm also part of the Colombian Plant Specialist Group, which is a very different type of a specialist group because it's focused on a country or geographical region. And in this case, well, we're also doing a lot of red list assessments, and we use that information for conservation planning at the spatial level. So we identify, for example, key biodiversity areas, but we also do some conservation action plans. As similar to the situation in Brazil, we have thousands of threatened species, and we cannot do detailed conservation action plans for all of them. So basically, we try to do a lot of, to incorporate our threatened species into the protected area system or other effective conservation measures based on areas so they can get protected in their habitats. But for a few strategic groups like palms and orchids, timbers, and cycads, we have conservation action plans. In this case, we have been doing most of them for the last 6-7 years. So this is a more recent experience, but it's an experience at the national level. So I want to combine those two experiences to share with you some lessons learned. And I want to do a disclaimer first. Conservation planning and conservation action is complex and challenging, as you probably know. And I think most of us, I speak for the specialist groups from IUCN, most of us are experts from the natural sciences. We come from biology or environmental sciences or resource management kinds of fields. But you will see that when you're doing conservation planning and action, you're gonna need to go beyond biology and natural sciences, right? In many cases, the problems that our species are facing are caused because of economical and political and cultural factors. So we actually need to, broaden our scope, and we need the help of many other people, many other institutions in order to be successful in conservation. So I'm going to talk from the point of view of a person that is an expert in the species, an ecologist. We love our species. We want to save them from extinction. We want to preserve biodiversity. But we need, is a very big challenge for us to get into this, planning and action process. And well, I also want to say most of us are focusing on threatened species, but that's not the only type of a species that we can prioritize for conservation planning. We can choose a species for conservation plans because of many other reasons. But anyway, I'm going to share lessons learned from my perspective in CICAD at the global and the local level. And anyway, sorry, I don't know what's happening with the coloring here, but anyway, the first lesson I want to share is that it's very important to emphasize the strategic part of a strategic planning. For example, actually think about what we call theories of change in some methodologies. There are many methodologies for conservation planning or project planning in general, logical framework and problem trees and stuff like that. This one I'm showing you here that we have used for the national plans in Colombia is called the Open Standards. It was designed actually for conservation plans for protected areas, but you can adjust them for planning for species conservation. And it's a very detailed methodology, and it forces you to think not only about the threats for the species or group of a species, but also to actually try to identify the causes of the threats that again are usually economic and legal or cultural in nature. So for doing this analysis, you actually need to collaborate with many other people and institutions. And I can talk to you about more this if you want to know about this methodology, but I just want to emphasize that in this methodology, you choose conservation targets. In our case, could be populations from a species, or it could be species, or it could be groups of a species, as we were seeing for the Brazil example. Sometimes we have way too many species, but we can group them in by region or by threat. In the case of Yvette was showing us the access to plan approach. Anyway, you can group a species by any criteria. And then you define the threats, which are here shown in pink. And then you try to do what we call a conceptual model of situational analysis. And then you try to actually understand why you have the threats here, because it's not the same, for example, if you have habitat destruction because there's industrial agriculture, versus if you have habitat destruction because you have small farmers are trying to, get their surviving needs met. The conservation strategies are going to be very different in those cases, even though if it's the same threat. So it's very important to understand all the causal links that actually many of these causes can interact with each other, and they can generate these threats for your species. And then you can build in a methodology like this, what we call a theory of change. You actually propose conservation actions, and then you say, okay, I'm gonna do this, and then in 5 years or 10 years, I'm gonna see these intermediate results, or I can get to these intermediate targets, and then I can reduce the threat, and then the status of my species or group of species is gonna improve. But you actually try to make that very conscious, and that will help a lot in planning the actions and then monitoring the actions, so you can actually learn from what you're doing, and if it's the case, adjust the planning and stuff like that. Anyway, the message here is that you have to be very detailed and very careful when you're planning, and then you have to use adaptive management. You have to implement actions and then monitoring the success, see if you're getting to your intermediate targets, and don't wait, to the final stage of your conservation plan to measure success. You need to actually be very careful about planning and monitoring, and that will help you a lot, I think. And then another lesson is that it's important to define adequate goals according to the scale of the plan and accommodate expectations accordingly. So for example, in the case of CICADS, the targets and the goals that we have at the global level are very different from the targets and goals we have for the national level. And I think you need to think, if you're working with just one species in a small region, or if you're working with a group of species in a huge country like Brazil, or if you're working in different contexts, you have to adjust the targets. Of course, the final goal for everybody is to save species from extinction, but again, depending on the scenario, depending on the threats, and depending on what you need to do, what is feasible, what may be more impactful or not, you have to adjust your goals and your targets. For example, in the case of CICADS, at the global level for the last 20 years, we have been very successful at general things, for example, like keeping a species list updated and doing red list several times, so we can, and this has been really wonderful. This has allowed us to aggregate people, to get people from the academia, but also from the horticultural world and environmental authorities and other stakeholders engaged. And then, for example, we have been very successful at networking at the global level, ex situ collections, so they can collaborate. Now we are talking about meta collections and stuff like that. For example, with CICADS, we were able to reply to an emergent global threat that arose about 15 years ago. We had an invasive insect that pretty much destroyed and drove to extinction one species in Guam, in one of the Pacific Islands. And we were able to share experiences and to mobilize at the international level to actually try to contain the spread of that invasive species and to help the people in Guam and other Pacific Islands to work on that. Anyway, so at the global level, it has been more about networking and getting the people together, getting the information, sharing experiences. But when we go and see the CICAD action plan at the national level, we also do national red lists, of course, to understand the situation of the species in the country, but we focus mostly on local actions like habitat protection and actually the propagation and reintroduction, restoration, and trying to establish sustainable use programs and stuff like that. And now we have, because of the support of BGCI and other institutions, a global conservation consortium for CICADs, and we kind of are linking these two levels, global and national. We also have CICAD conservation plans at the national level in South Africa, in Mexico, and one province in Australia. And some other countries are working on that. And we are trying to get, for example, this figure of conservation champions in each country or in each region. We need to actually do more specific local conservation actions, but that's coordinated at the global level. And then, I will say this is from my personal experience. I'm a biologist again, working in conservation. And the first time I did a conservation plan, I was participating in the global conservation plan for CICADs, but the first time I actually was like the champion or the leader for one, I didn't go like super big. That might be overwhelming if you're gonna do for the first time a conservation plan. So one of my recommendations, it might not be effective everywhere in all the cases, but I think one good thing would be to start small, a smaller scale, with a challenge that is not that overwhelming, and then, build trust in yourself and your team and with the other stakeholders, and build credibility. In the case of Colombia, for example, we did first a project in 2009, 2010, and we actually developed a conservation plan for one species, working with one environmental authority in one place, right? And we were able to get some local communities involved, and we were working with one botanical garden, and we were able, again, to build trust, to build credibility, to get more visibility for the things that we were doing. And then we did another species, and then we did a group of species in a region, and then 5 years later we did a national plan for all the CICADs, which are about 25 in the country. So I think, you can, if you're new to this, I think one good recommendation would be to, kind of build your way towards expertise and in conservation planning and implementation also. And then, there's a very common challenge that people talk when we're talking about conservation planning in general, but conservation planning for plants, and is how to engage the proper stakeholders for the long term, and also how to get funding. And my recommendation would be that we try to engage actors that can align their conservation targets with your targets, that is, look for synergies. In many cases, you can get a lot done without a lot of money. For example, if you look for botanical gardens or local communities that want to propagate species because they're interested in producing timber or medicinal plants or other things. So for example, we have helped local communities build community nurseries because they are interested in propagating plants, and then we get our CICAD species, into their propagation plans or the propagation efforts, and then, we collaborate. They want to do these nurseries, and we want to propagate CICADs to then reintroduce in the field, so we work with them. Or for example, in Colombia, there's a very big movement for private reserves, and we're identifying key biodiversity areas and other effective area-based conservation measures. And there's a lot of people working on that already. For example, many KBAs have been declared because of bird species and mammals and amphibians, and they want to justify creating a new protected area or justify the management of our existing protected area. And they're happy to learn, for example, that they have threatened plant species in their territory. Many of the protected areas don't even know that they may have threatened species of plants in their places. And we can work together. I mean, they're looking for resources. Maybe they already have resources for education activities or for restoration of habitats. So we can maybe collaborate with them to get our species, what they need in the framework of other existing conservation efforts, or work with botanical gardens, even with environmental authorities. Sometimes environmental authorities, they already have targets. For example, they need to protect 10% of the threatened species they have in their jurisdiction, and they have a little bit of money for that. So you can go and say, okay, I have here 5 species that can help you get to your targets, and I will work with you for that. So again, you can try to build synergies with them, maybe even use some of the resources they already have in order to advance your conservation targets. And then I will also say, this sounds terrible, but I think is a good way to say it. You have to sell your plans. You have to sell your groups. I mean, find charismatic stories because you need stakeholders to get engaged, and again, for the long term. So there's a lot of cool things about plants that people don't know. And I guarantee you can find a cool thing about your plants. We're very lucky with cycads because, cycads are pretty, they're ornamental, but they're also living fossils. And, they remind people of dinosaurs because dinosaurs ate cycads, and you can, get their attention very easily with that. And we have used that to do, educational products and stuff. And do not underestimate the importance of these other conservation actions like communications and educations and engaging the stakeholders. And I'm sure you can find good stories. Your plant group might be important pollinators, so they might be very important because they're crop wild relatives, or because of people use them, but also because of ecological impact. I mean, there are many things. And actually build stories, work with artists and communicators and other people to build stories and to build communication and educational products you can use to engage your stakeholders, because once they're really interested in your plans, they want to help you. Most people will get fascinated with plants. They just don't know them well enough, which is, Marcio was talking about plant blindness. We need to overcome that. And finally, more of a practical point, but I think this is also very important, and you should not underestimate this. You need, I would say, at least one person that can dedicate enough time for guiding and monitoring implementation of the plan. Most of us have, are volunteers for these conservation plans, or they might be part of our job, but it's not our whole job. So I would say it's very important to get a little bit of resources, or maybe a collaboration with a conservation institution in which you can get one person to focus on this. So this would, in the case of Colombia, for example, we funded an NGO, a small NGO that is in charge of implementing the conservation action plan for the cycads of the country. And we have one person hired full-time, and that person, can do a lot of things and can engage the stakeholders and can go to the field anytime. And they can do a lot of things to actually keep things going with all these volunteer people and, all these stakeholders we need to collaborate with. We have been very lucky because we have the support of Montgomery Botanical Center and other people that actually provide some funding to have one person. But even if you don't have money, try to get an agreement with an institution. But I think it's really, really important to have a person kind of mobilizing everybody, and getting things done. Because otherwise, if you rely only on the volunteer or like the time of people are volunteering, it's a little bit more difficult. So with that, I will leave you. This is my email in case you want to talk more about this. Okay, I will leave there.
Thank you, Cristina. It was another great presentation. I think we have overall through the speakers really good examples of how things work. And Cristina made a really good point that it didn't occur to me. I always get overwhelmed with the number of species we have to deal with for plants. And it's like, we can't go species by species. But Christina made a really good point. When you're starting, it's good to start with one species and a small area, and then progress from there to a multi-species assessment. And I think really important across the presentations, we saw how important it is to include local communities and other stakeholders that are not just scientists. That's the key, right? They are the ones living side by side with the species and having an impact on if they are protected or not. And yeah, Christina made a good point. We tend to forget about that as scientists, and it's crucial. Conservation is not just a natural science, it's a social science, and we need to start including more the social side of it. Okay, and with this, I just want to remember people on YouTube, please join us on Zoom. We clearly have less participants than the ones that registered. And to go for breakout rooms, we'll have to stop the live streaming. We didn't realize that, sorry, we're still learning. So yeah, if you're on YouTube, please join us on Zoom. Kelly already shared the link there, and I'll open the floor for questions before we go to the breakout rooms. Are there any questions? No one posted anything on the chat, but feel free to raise your hand or put your questions on the chat. I'm also going to share, I just want to call out for the conservation planning specialist group, steps and principles. I think it's a great document, and I'm going to post the link to that there. They've also done a series of webinars over the summer specifically on that I'll put the link in the chat as well. And they regularly have training for facilitators. And they open it in their website. If you're interested, I would totally advise you to do that training. It's online, usually it's free. They also have in-person options, but those are paid. Yeah.
Katia, a few people, or a couple of people, I think, sorry, I'm trying to see the names. Anyway, they were commenting on the importance of, broadening our scope and trying to think about, trying to think beyond just biology and natural sciences. And I'm wondering if there's anybody here in the audience that is, from, I don't know, the social sciences, or has more experience from the natural resource management side, or are we all here from the biology and natural sciences side of things? It's usually like that in the IUCN specialist groups, right? But maybe we have some other people. I mean, in some, like in the Colombian plant specialist group, we actually have people from environmental authorities that are part, but they are usually biologists, but they do work in the environmental authorities. But is there anybody here that has more experience from like the social sciences, for example, or other types of? Probably not.
Looks like not.
Sadly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's important to reach out, right?
Yeah. Eduardo, you have your hand up.
Yes, I want to address one question to Christina. So Christina, great work, great presentation as usual. But I was wondering, after you conducted 3 cycles of species reassessment with your cycads, could you detect any genuine changes on the conservation status of these species? And another curiosity is how you are doing to address the pathway to fully ecological recovery. And if you had a chance to apply the green status of species, because this in Brazil still are challenges, as Marcio said, we reassessed the conservation status of the Faveiro de Wilson, the Dimorphonia species, the study case he shared with us. And what we found out is that we increased the number of information, but we could not yet detect like a improvement on the species population. We just planted some seedlings in the field, and now we need to monitor that. And this is still a challenging, and the green status is still data dependent for all species. And as you know, for Brazilian species, as well for Colombian species, we don't have many information. So sometimes it's difficult to do that, but with a small group such as the cycads, I was wondering if you could have more success with that.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Eduardo. Before I answer your question for cycads, I want to say that's another big challenge for us, right? We need to show success in our conservation strategies, and it's not easy to show, like meaningful, like very quantitative success when we're doing conservation action for plants. And actually at the national level for the Global Biodiversity Framework, one of the main indicators for a species would be the Red List Index, which is what Eduardo is talking about. And it's not easy to move species from one category to another category to actually show success. So yeah, that's a huge point. And Domitila is here. Maybe Domitila can talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, in the case of cycads, most of the changes that we see from one red list assessment to another are not genuine. Mostly they change because we have more information, like what happened in Brazil and what happened in Kenya. In Kenya, they were telling us, well, we went looking for the species and we found new populations. That's usually what happens with most of us, I think. So actually the category might change to a better one, but it's not a genuine change. But in cycads, we do have a few genuine changes, mostly because cycads have been overexploited for the ornamental market illegally in like huge quantities in places like Mexico and Southern Africa for many years. And that situation has improved because of CITES and many of the efforts in the countries. So they're not, we don't have now people, like collecting thousands of individuals in the field illegally. So yeah, some of our cycads actually have improved because of conservation actions, but mostly because of our exploitation related stuff. In the case of habitat loss, yeah, we usually don't have genuine changes. I mean, positive changes in that scenario. But yeah, that's a very important point. How to show you're being successful in your conservation plan. It might not be that you change the category of the species, but you still can have a lot of success. So you can show, we need to look for indicators beyond, Red List Index and green status are really important and awesome, and we should do them. And they can show changes at the big level. The green status particularly can show the impacts of your conservation action. So I think that's very important. We're beginning to do that with cycads. But yeah, we also need to look for other, let's say, more precise indicators to show success in conservation action for plants.
Thanks, Christina. And this is what happened with Favela de Wilson as well. We did a lot of effort. There are a lot of people involved with the process. Definitely, it worked to do the conservation, but it's still a challenge to measure these genuine changes and trends towards fully ecologically recovered. So let's try to do more green status and red list index.
Thank you.
I can just add something quickly to that. And the red list index is well known for not being a very sensitive indicator because it's really difficult to change a category. But you'll see that the new Global Biodiversity Framework is asking us to improve the status of 20% of species by 2030. Maybe they will negotiate to 5 or 10%. The negotiations are still underway. But we have to show that we can improve the conservation status of 20% of our plants, which is going to be incredibly difficult. And when we have a red list index and we improve the status of 0.03% of our plants in a megadiverse country through our conservation action. So we have a long way to go. But I think the thing is to be aware that, that the species that you work on, it is possible to choose single site endemics or really restricted species, and if you do protect them and change that, you can show a change in status. And then the other thing is to try to, we need to collectively bring this up in the IUCN that we need a more sensitive indicator. And so one of the things that's being suggested is that we can try to change the. So I find the red list categories themselves, the way you do an assessment, it leans towards making something threatened. So you can have 80% of the population getting better, but if there's still decline happening somewhere, it still comes out as a threat status. So that is the problem. So I think that we may really need to look at that internally with the scientists who work in the Red List technical working group and maybe the Red List committee to see if we can't actually change that. And the only suggestion that's been made is that you can start to reflect a species when the population status option is stable. Because you have to say the population trend. Is it declining? Is it stable? Is it increasing? So from when you can stabilize it, that could be an indication that it's getting better. It might not yet have increased, but it's not going down like it was. So those are the only suggestions so far. But I agree, it's a big problem actually that we can't really reflect it, and we're being asked to show a reflection of 20%. So it's a serious challenge. And I think the green status is very difficult to achieve. It's very complicated, very demanding. And we have gone for a much more simple approach in our country of just protection level. Are we protecting enough of a population to persist into the long term? And that's all we're asking, not like, have we recovered it to its former state and all of those things. Because the green status asks a million questions and really technically complicated. That's my opinion. Thanks.
Thank you, Taylor. I can see a number of hands raised. Just to say, Kranti Yardi shared in the chat with me who are the stakeholders included in the Kenya case study. So I don't know if Herbert and Yvette, maybe you can put that in the chat. And then David was commenting, then we need to improve data collection and data quality. Yeah, I don't know if any of the speakers want to comment on that. I'd say it's ideally yes, but in mega diverse countries like Colombia, Brazil, and others with so many plant species, it's hard to access all the data we need, right? Don't know if anyone wants to make a specific comment on that. No, and I'll pass to Denshi.
I just want to say, I mean, of course, we always want more information, but as Katya is saying, it's challenging. But I will say again, look for synergies. I mean, there might be other efforts in the country or your region already trying to get better biodiversity information. So try to collaborate and, try to improve access. I don't know, like try to do as much as you can with little resources. There's a lot of people interested in getting more information about plants. We just need to, look for those opportunities.
And citizen science as well. I think that's a good way for us to go and get people more interested in plants. Again, I think the Procura-se, the searching for project in Brazil, I think it's a great example to involve local communities. Okay, I'm looking at time and I can see we have a number of hands raised. Sheila, do you want to go first?
Hi, yeah, sure. Thank you so much for that talk, Christina. I'm from the Philippines and I just have this question. I was so inspired by your talk. In our country, is really rampant with, when it comes to cycads, to orchids and everything. And it has really gone up during the pandemic because people lost their jobs and that's one way they can earn money. What really confuses that we are always advocating to encourage people to plant native plants, right? So but then the thing is they acquired these native plants illegally because they are poached. So I don't know what would be the best conservation strategy for that. And because you mentioned about